live and everyone's here. I guess Administrator Yorkie, are we waiting for Brady and Molly at all?
I do not know about that, actually.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll get started here, and that'll be fine. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the special meeting of the Cook County Board of Commissioners on Tuesday, April 6th at 8:31 a.m. Please rise and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And then I should read the statement again about our pandemic here in virtual meetings. Number one, it has been determined that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the related peacetime emergency declaration made by Governor Walz in accordance with Minnesota Statutes Chapter 12. Number two, we have ensured that all members of the body participating in the meeting, wherever their physical location, can hear one another and can hear all discussion and testimony offered at today's meeting. Number three, we have also ensured that members of the public present at the regular meeting location of the body can hear all discussion, testimony, and all votes of the members of the body. We have urged the public not to attend this meeting in person because of the COVID-19 pandemic and have ensured that members of the public can view and monitor the meeting remotely in real time by broadcasting the meeting on the Cook County website. Number four, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we have determined that it may be unfeasible for County Auditor Brady Powers, County Attorney Molly Hicken, County Administrator James Yorkie, and members of the Board of Commissioners to be physically present at the County Boardroom, the Cook County Courthouse. Number five, all votes will be conducted by roll call, so each member's vote on each issue will be identified and recorded. And so, just as a little background here, the idea of the Labor Management Committee was kind of brought to Commissioner Storley and I's attention during negotiations and particularly during mediation. I had expressed some frustrations with a bit of the process, and our mediator suggested this could be a good tool to help build common understanding of things that we're going to be looking at in the negotiations, and also just building a stronger and healthier culture between management and bargaining units, and so it seemed like something we should have as a whole board discussion, and it also seemed like we have pretty full agendas at our regular board meeting, and so I didn't want to try to squeeze this in anywhere and rather make some time to have a conversation about it explicitly. And so with that, I guess I can turn it over to Administrator Yorkie if you wanted to present your slides. And you're on mute.
My apologies. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Good to be with you this morning. And the slides that I put together are pretty brief, but I just wanted to make sure that we kind of had a common understanding of what labor management committees are, what they look like, and how they can operate. There's no single template for how to do this. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. But there are some commonalities in the way these committees are structured. And so I'll share my screen now and we can get into that discussion. Okay. Can you see it? Okay, great. All right. So just to start off with the definition, and there isn't one definition. I'm sorry, I was getting some background.
I'm sorry, I didn't say anything, but I was going to say something. And
Oh,
just that your slides are not in presentation mode. I don't know if that was your intention or not.
Here, I can fix that. Okay, is that better?
It's the same.
Okay, hold on just a second then. It looks to be in presentation mode on my, but maybe I'm.
Yeah, and it's not critical. I was just,
No.
details.
No, we can do this the right way. Sorry.
Not a problem.
Okay. Is that better?
Perfect.
Okay. Sorry about that. Still a newbie at screen sharing. So anyway, to get into what labor management committees are, you can find a number of different definitions on various websites. But, oh, and now I can't advance the slides. Okay. There we go. So I kind of put together a definition that was based on what I'd seen on a number of different websites. And I settled on a definition of a committee of union and management representatives who share the common goal of improving workplace conditions and who are willing to work together in a collaborative way to achieve that goal. And I think this speaks to what the chairman was talking about in terms of the nature of contract negotiations. They tend to be contentious. They tend to be occur with sort of a competitive dynamic, each side trying to get its best position, often at the expense of the other side. And so the Labor Management Committee is really an opportunity to have a conversation that is less focused on the details of a contract and more on just what some common needs and issues of concerns are, and working in a collaborative way to find solutions to those common concerns. And so there are several reasons why we might consider creating a labor management committee. Again, it provides a forum for communication, for information gathering, research, debate, and joint problem solving. And those things are not something that are always available as part of a negotiation process. It creates an opportunity for dialogue when both parties' interests are aligned. For example, when health insurance prices are going up, what path do we follow to address that? It's something that both sides have to grapple with and make concessions on. It can help build trust between the parties because it's a conversation that's not occurring so much in a competitive environment, but more in a collaborative environment. And then I think what I heard the commissioners talking about is more of like a standing committee. Now I'll get into what conditions these committees are typically formed under. But you can have a committee that's really focused on kind of working sort of in parallel with the negotiation process. But I think we're talking more about a standing committee that would create an opportunity for ongoing dialogue even between contract negotiation cycles. And so again, it's just sharing and building an understanding of concerns when they first surface, rather than waiting for the next negotiation cycle to address them. So characteristics of LMCs, they typically form during negotiating processes and tend to be focused on addressing issues particular to the negotiation process. They further down, you can see they may have timelines for formation, duration, and expiration. So, in many cases, these are committees that are formed to address or facilitate understanding of certain issues related to negotiation process, and then they disband. Another characteristic is that there are always an even number of members from union and management. And to ensure that both sides are heard, it's typically chaired by an impartial third party. The purpose of the committee should be clearly articulated at the outset of the group's formation. And like most committees, it generally has a defined internal operating structure and procedure. So, in fact, bylaws are frequently part of the equation so that everybody understands what how the committee operates, what the process is for being heard, for raising concerns, et cetera. There's typically a defined meeting schedule. And then if formed as a standing committee, often members have defined terms. So you may be on for a couple of years and then rotate off. And that's entirely up to the committee members, how they want to handle that. So issues that labor management committees should not address or cannot address, it's not about demanding or proposing changes to agreements that have been settled. That's not what this is about. And then also it's not a forum for discussing grievances because that's part of, the grievance process is outlined in the contract, and that is separate from this process. So I found this this chart on a website from a labor management group out in New York State. And I thought it was a useful way of looking at how we have done negotiations in the past, how we typically interact with unions, and how we could do so in the future. And so there are 5 different ways of resolving conflicts or not resolving conflicts. The first is avoidance, which really doesn't lead to a solution. Accommodation is a second strategy, and it's characterized as unassertive and cooperative. So basically one party forgoes its own concerns to serve the interests of the other. And that's a win and lose situation. Competing, which is how we typically do negotiations. One side asserts its desires and needs, the other side does the same, and in the end, one party gets what it wants, or it doesn't. And so there's still a win-lose situation going on here. Compromising is a fourth approach. Obviously, when folks compromise, they get some gains on each side, but there's also some loss. And then the fifth approach is collaboration. And in a collaboration situation, both parties are working together to find solutions that best serve both sides. And I hear Commissioner Mills and Storley, I hear you saying that that's kind of the dynamic that we're hoping to achieve in this committee process. So the kinds of questions that a labor management committee could explore include things like what data should we use as a basis for determining cost of living adjustments? That's something obviously that was an issue in the last negotiation cycle. And I think it's very easy to cherry pick data to make your case, but at the end of the day, there's probably an opportunity, I think, for us to sit down with the unions and find some kind of data marker, whether it's like the consumer price index for like the upper Midwest or something else that really kind of defines what the cost of living looks like in northern Minnesota, and that we can use that as a basis for determining what COLA should be. What is the most equitable way to respond to increases in health insurance premiums? We are getting a new carrier this year. We don't yet know what the impact of that will be in terms of premium costs, but you know, historically, health insurance prices always go up. So that's always something that has to be on the radar. What Minnesota counties might we define as peer counties for the purpose of comparing compensation and benefit offerings? You know, or contract terms. I think that's something that that can be very useful in these conversations. And then, are there any workplace condition concerns that we've not adequately addressed through previous collective bargaining processes? Because things change over time, things come up, and this can be a real opportunity for us to talk through those issues and maybe find some solutions even before the next contract negotiation cycle. So that is really all I have. There's certainly more detail in the federal document that I emailed, and that will get posted on the county's information portal. But I will stop there and see if there are questions, and that's it. And I do not claim to be an expert on this topic.
Yeah, thank you, Administrator Yorkie. I think we're all in that similar boat. But I don't want to presume that none of us have had experience with it. So I'd really appreciate concerns or questions or past experiences to aid us in this discussion. I think the points you brought up about just the whys, I think are very important, and I want to strengthen the culture of our organization and having more frequent, regular discussions versus going at it every 3 years. I think would do a lot and what I mean by going at it every 3 years is 3 years in between negotiations, and that's not necessarily the case. We did a 1-year contract this time, but if we had monthly ongoing conversations about issues, or maybe we don't need monthly. I think that's the recommendation starting out at least. It's going to be many fewer surprises for when the conversations happen. So I think we can just continually build this and build trust through these conversations and just have common understanding. So. Does anyone have any questions, concerns, perspectives they'd like to share?
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Sullivan.
Yes, I'd like to ask of our HR director what type of feedback you've received from the unions about this particular approach of a labor management committee.
I have not had an opportunity to talk with the collective bargaining units at this point. I wanted the commissioners to have a chance to discuss this opportunity to see if it was a way of moving forward that you could all agree on, and then present it to the collective bargaining units. But I've not had those conversations.
All right, well, thank you. I do think it would really help to improve communication and doesn't allow things to fester for a long time if there are issues and concerns that can be discussed in a collaborative fashion. So I personally really like the idea, and it just gives us an advanced opportunity to discuss operational problems that we may be having.
Thank you, Commissioner Sullivan. And maybe to elaborate a little bit about the few conversations we have had with the collective bargaining units it was discussed in mediation with those groups, and there was a general willingness and interest. And then we also have discussed it at the personnel committee, looking for feedback. And there was a little bit more skepticism, I'd say, there, but also hope and interest. And I feel like at the end of the meeting, most everyone was thinking, yes, let's give this a shot and see how it works. One of the catches I see is it's not light work by any means. It'll be difficult work, and the frequency of that will be an additional burden, but also I think it will aid in that. And so I think everyone recognized that, and that maybe was part of the skepticism and just past experiences, past cultures. There's some healing that needs to happen, and that goes way back, and I don't know, maybe beyond my experience, but that takes time and effort. So. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Commissioner Salsa.
I will say that I have been on 2 of these committees in my career. What was a little bit unique, I think, James, in your presentation, you talked about it, and it actually at least came across to me that maybe these groups, worked along the same lines as when you were, on negotiating type things. The ones that I were on, they were specifically meant to deal with issues that were not contractual. So you stayed out of negotiations, and it really focused on workplace conditions, how you got things done, because we always were looking for improvements in productivity. And sometimes those lent itself to where at least it was perceived that you weren't treating the workers, you were thinking more about productivity than the workers, conditions and this type of thing. And so that was why we had gotten together. And the other thing that we found was by having the committee, it kept many of the issues that were coming up during negotiations that didn't really belong in negotiations if you were resolving issues on your day-to-day, going through. And the last thing I would say that I am a fan of the process more than anything, when it took us a little while to get the right membership and to kind of go through the team building and building of trust. But once we built that trust, then our ability, when it was time to come together for negotiations, was just a much cleaner process because we had already resolved the issues of how to sit down, address issues plainly, specifically, right down to what the real issues were, and be able to move through things even when they were difficult. So, but it really took both parties had to get aligned and really respect the process and really work the process.
Thank you, Commissioner Salsa. I was curious what your experience with them had been, and I assumed you had some experience but didn't know. And it does sound like a slightly different focal point, but I think the takeaways and the values are still there, and yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Chairman, it's just my view. I'd be a little concerned if you had a separate committee that was dealing with these issues at the same time that you were trying to do the negotiating. That I just don't know how you would keep that very clean process, I guess, has been my only concern from that perspective.
That's a good point, and I don't have an answer, but I want to learn and figure out. I mean, I think Administrator Yorkie expressed that same concern when we had spoken in our negotiating team, kind of as a debriefing. And yeah, that'll be messier. But my hope is that we'll get this process started, and we'll start building trust. We'll start figuring out how the, like you said, the structure of it and the mutual understandings go, and then yes, negotiations are going to come up, but we'll maybe just try to keep on the process, and hopefully there'll be a little bit more background discussion already before the negotiations start that we can work off of, and it won't be as clean as we'd like it to be, but I'm hoping they can kind of play off each other to everyone's benefit.
Mr. Chair.
Please, Commissioner Storley.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with Commissioner Salzman's review and also your opinion there too, Commissioner Mills. I see it as a forming of this committee to improve work conditions. That's good, yes, but to also have a head start before negotiations are being called again, and we don't know when that's going to happen. That you have some collaborative ideas in mind, how you're going to work with them, but have your kind of guidelines already there, so that when the day comes for negotiations, you'll have, you'll have a form that you can rely on with people. Now, my question would be, when it was pointed out that there'll be even numbers by management and union. I believe we had one union where we had 2 members and their negotiator. We had one union with 1 person. So we would have to figure out, if we're going to have even representation in each of the 3 unions, then that would have to be worked out ahead of time. But, I just like the idea of a collaborative environment, so that union folks understand that we really, want to achieve the best goal that we can, whether it be, as Commissioner Mills knows very well, we tried to do some data, and that's important to do that, but that the unions know that we're coming at the table this time with the idea that we have set some precedents, and we'll move forward with what we can to be as aware of workplace concerns and bring everybody up to more speed, because we had limited time to do this. We had some background on it, but I think we really want to get up to speed now with the idea of forming this labor management committee.
Thank you, Commissioner Storley. Director Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Storley, to address the comment about the number of union representatives, typically we do have 2 stewards. We have 2 stewards for our Cook County Employees Association. The 49ers also have 2 stewards, and LELS, representing the Sheriff's Department, have 2 stewards, and then each has a business agent. At the negotiating table, LELS and 49ers had 2 business agents, as is their practice, just during negotiations. So I think we can presume confidently that there would be 2 stewards and 1 business agent a part of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dixon. A lot of these details I think we can work out and figure out, and it's unclear. There's a little discrepancy between the state's resources and the federal resources information, and I see both the state and the feds just talking about what's common or best practice in their experience, and largely guidelines. I don't know how strictly we need to follow them, especially with numbers. Before going through the federal information, it was my understanding that we would have all 3 unions together meeting with management, and the federal information looked more like one unit with management at a time, and and I was really hoping to have and there's we have to be careful with that too, because there's laws about what kind of collaboration can actually happen between unions, and so but I was hoping for a more comprehensive collaboration, I guess, between everybody at once. And so if we're looking at just those numbers, management would be outnumbered nearly 3-1, and that's, I didn't see a problem with that, because I'm looking for true collaboration here, and maybe that's a little pie in the sky, but that's what I was hoping for, and we can see what the training really mandates or suggests. Commissioner Salsa.
Mr. Chairman, I that's why I was in the discussion. That's why I was saying you don't necessarily want to set it up specifically with the same members as your negotiating committee. In fact, when possible, you want to have people from the operations portion of your business unit, because many of the things that, this has just been my experience, remember, and that's been limited to a competitive marketplace type thing, not a public service. But you want people there that you can have the conversations, and they're the actual problem solvers. They're decision makers, right? So that when your union representatives are talking to you, they know that you don't have to go talk to somebody else to actually be able to come to a resolution on items. That was very important, because, as I said, I was on it twice, and the first one, we actually had too many members on it, quite frankly, but that was because we came from a very large organization. We didn't want to leave anybody out, but then we could never actually reach a decision. Once we came back at it a couple of years later and we pared it down, but had the right people there that could actually make some decisions. But that was why they kept us out of the negotiating aspect, right? That's why we weren't dealing specifically with contractual. We were working with productivity. We were working with other items along that, but those can be resolved. But it is important to make sure that you have the right people with the right skill sets to be able to have those collaborative discussions and be able to work through items and not be able to talk forthright without being offended and move through things. That's just a key aspect of being able to do that. Or if your skill set, if you're worried about it and you're not there, you need to have a third party that's sitting there that can actually kind of help you, coach you through that neither party looks at as, there for any other reason than to just do that.
Those are good points. And yeah, I can see, well, in the county's case, and in management's case, it was Commissioner Storley and I, because we were not up for election, and our seats were still in place, guaranteed, and so that seemed, if negotiations came forward, that or when they came forward, that we would still, through the year, the year end, we would still be in our seats and have that continuity. Versus, I'm not sure how the union selected their representatives exactly, but they were strong negotiators, and I'm not as certain that the same members would be as strong collaborators. I think everyone can be, but yeah, to your point of working with the right people, I think that's an excellent point. So, yeah, we'll have to. I'm hoping if we're all on board with this, that we're going to learn a lot more from the state through the training about just helpful tactics and composition for the creation of this. But I don't know quite what to expect yet from the state. Mr. Yorkie.
Yeah, I was going to ask Commissioner Swalson. I think it's really great that we have the benefit of your experience, by the way, with these issues. I'm wondering, you mentioned being through a couple of iterations of committee cycle. And I'm wondering, you said the first group was too large, and then the second group was smaller and it worked better. And I'm just wondering kind of what numbers you're talking about.
The very first time we did it, we tried to have people from each of our unions, but also from each of our different business units, and our company was too big. We had, I don't remember the exact number. I know it was well over 30 people when we all came together, and we had to have conference rooms.
Mm-hmm.
It was just, the training was good. We worked through a few issues. It just was unmanageable because of the number of people. And so once we got back to doing it, we still had people from every business unit, but we didn't try to represent every single station. And so we kind of moved up. We let the business agent from each of the unions select, which people they wanted from the union at the stage, from the various organizations that equaled a certain number, right? And when we came back together, as I recall, I think we were in the teens, but all with a group of people that when we went through some team building exercises and got everybody together, and then we took on a couple of pretty tough issues and with a facilitator to work through and learn how to be directive and, in our conversation without making it personal and doing those kind of things. It felt pretty good to work through a couple of hard issues that had been out there for a while. And that kind of built that relationship. So then we could do it going forward on many different.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Hawkins.
Yeah, I never been on a negotiating team, really don't understand all of this. So my questions are probably pretty basic here. I'm not quite understanding some of the issues. I do think this is a good idea. More talking, agree with that. But if there have been issues that have been coming up, doesn't that come up in our personnel committee or safety committee? I'm just wondering how the relationship between all of these is going to work if we go ahead and do this committee also. And then I have some follow-up questions, but if anybody can answer that.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Hawkins, and that's a really great question, and I'd say similar questions were brought up in the personnel committee. And you would think that many, or if not all, of issues would be resolved outside of negotiations that could be, but there were some issues that did come up in negotiations that were not part of. They didn't need to be resolved through a contract. It was more of communication, and I'm not entirely sure why that was. I think it's largely just with the changes in our organizational structure. We're still fairly new to administrative government. I think even the personnel committee itself is fairly new. HR Director Dixon's position is new in that it's separate from administrator, and before that I think it was more of a coordination. So there's just a lot of moving parts, and I'm not sure why issues are not resolved before the negotiations, but what I was hoping for was another avenue for issues to be directly addressed. In the personnel committee, we more talk about job descriptions specifically, and hiring new positions, that kind of thing, and reviewing that. Issues like that came up in negotiations, I think, could have been brought up in the personnel. I don't know why. Ms. Dixon, do you have better perspective there? I feel like I'm struggling here.
I think you make a really good point that the personnel committee is relatively new. along with administrative form of government and my position. I think ultimately the agenda frames the conversations that we have. So unless the stewards that are represented at the personnel committee bring issues up, they won't necessarily get addressed. And so it's a good point to look at the structure of that particular meeting. The other thing that I'll add is in the fall of 19, when I first started in this role, Kristen Foster, who at that time was our county engineer, started creating meetings between the 49ers and HR. And I have extended that to CCEA as well as LELS. So we have a standing quarterly meeting that we are able to talk about things like, why does E-Time not allow employees to check this box versus this box? And how is that calculated in terms of our comp time? Or what about this process around recruiting? Can we enhance because we feel like we're not getting the type of candidates that we really want, right? With the credentialing that we want. So what are some avenues that we can tackle? And so we have those kinds of conversations, and that's been very beneficial. I'm not sure the role that meeting would play moving forward if there was an LMC instituted. And so there's not only personnel, there's the benefits committee that has union representation on it, safety and wellness has union representation on it, and then the kind of one-on-one between myself, department head, and union reps as well. So there's a lot of conversations going on. What I like about the LMC is it is looking at bigger picture county-wide issues such as that for example, the data that we use from peer counties, who are our peer counties, and having an agreement on that, so that when we go to the table, we have that data readily available. Or looking at the healthcare issue. So I think it has a role, and I think if it is a multi-pronged approach, more communication is always better.
Thank you, Ms. Dixon. That helped me, and it did just that bigger picture, I guess. Much like our regular board meetings, they're pretty full, and same is true with the personnel committee. It's pretty full, and so there may not always be room or time. And I also wonder if the quarterly meetings, which I'm very grateful and thankful for, I'm not a part of, but that they're happening, those may be incorporated into the LMC, and to have that larger picture versus some of the issues that were brought into negotiations were not as bigger picture, and they were more just some specifics and some details that are still important, of course, but it's the bigger picture, I guess, that I'm shooting for here. But you had other questions too, Commissioner Hawkins?
Yeah, so thinking about, I'm worried about just adding another layer, and I want to make sure there's communication. So I'm wondering about meeting minutes and who's keeping track and making sure that everybody knows what's going on and what's being discussed. That's one thing. I'm also wondering about, so I've heard mention of a facilitator and something about the state. So I'm assuming we're going to do something, and I'm wondering about the cost for that. If we've looked into what do we think this new committee is going to cost us? And yeah, those are just a couple off the top of my head right now. I got to read my notes.
Thank you. Yeah, and I have no experience with this. It's kind of a new idea, but I've been trying to do research and figure out how it works and what's involved and costs too. And my understanding is the mediation, the Bureau of Mediation Services does not have a cost for that training, and their goal is really to stabilize labor in Minnesota. And so they just want to make everything better. They want to make all the processes better. They can't make everything better, but they're looking to always improve the process. And the cost is going to be our time and our staff time. That's going to be the cost, and it is another layer. But yes, it is a burden for sure, both time and energy. But my hope is that it'll lead to a improved outcome and improved trust, improved communications, and just a stronger culture in the county.
So I'm wondering about, okay, so we formed this committee. We still don't know the makeup of it yet. But is this committee going to make decisions and changes based on their discussion, or does everything still come back to the board for us to say, yes, we agree with this? Or how do we envision this working?
Yeah, the little that I've gathered from the state resources is that these are recommendations, and so if management at the county is involved, I think there would be more than recommendations for management, but the committee's recommendations would then go to each bargaining unit as recommendations, but the bargaining unit does not have to accept them. It can still come to we can come to some understanding within the committee and bring our recommendations to each group, but at the end of the day, when negotiations happen, it's still, they could just throw those out the window and say forget it. However, there's a lot of strength in that collaborative discussion in the committee that I think groups could be persuaded with, and also I think there's a lot of weight to the committee if we got down to the road to mediation again, or even arbitration. I think going through this process is going to prevent that, or hopefully help prevent it. But if we do go that far, then kind of those, looking back at that process and those recommendations could bring weight to helping mediation or deciding an arbitration case.
Do we have a timeline? If we say, yes, we think this is a good idea, and we say, let's go for it, what's the timeline for implementation?
I think that's largely on the Bureau of Mediation Services, because they have fairly limited resources and lots of negotiations and a good number of mediations, it sounded like. So the very earliest it sounded like was June, if I'm remembering that right, to go through the training, and then the formation after that. I honestly don't know. So there won't be a whole lot of time before what I'd anticipate the next round of negotiations happening. But again, it's not something I don't think we benefit from waiting on forming this. I think the benefit is just going to happen over time once it is formed and put into practice, and conversations are happening and options are explored. Did that timeline, Ms. Dixon, do you remember any more specifics with the timeline as far as BMS's?
Mr. Chair, I just remember the comment made that there are 6 to 7 mediators for the state of Minnesota, and that they are scheduled out typically a couple of months in advance. So depending on when we request their services, we may be looking about 2 months out. I also know that at least one of our unions has already communicated with us an intent to begin. I'll ask Administrator Yorkie to confirm that.
That is correct.
Begin negotiations.
They've expressed an intent to negotiate, but we have not talked about when that process would start.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Storley.
to Stacy's point, as far as what would be discussed, I think there already is much discussion that can form from what's already happened. And so that would be the basis of discussion right away. And then, as you've indicated, Commissioner Mills, the training then would follow. So there would be lots of discussion before you would really find out from the training, sorry.
Thank you, Commissioner Storley. Yeah. And just for the board's perspective, one of the questions that came up in the personnel committee was, well, if we're forming this labor management committee, what's the point of negotiations? It almost seemed like this was a form of ongoing negotiations, and to some extent, it kind of is, but just the process of negotiations that I felt was very limited, and it was almost like a race, and a very competitive race, and so my hope is to make it less competitive, make it more collaborative. I don't think there's no place for a race in it, and in that if all goes as well as it could in the labor management committee, negotiations could be a breeze, and there could be very little need to actually negotiate. It would just be a formality, and I don't know if that's realistic or even desired, but yes, please, Commissioner Smallson.
Well, and I think, Mr. Chair, that's where we'll have to get some guidance on this, because of course, when you went into negotiations, you had very strict rules that you had to follow. And just as Commissioner Hawkins had brought up, the ability to distribute minutes from meetings and that type of thing, you can't do that during negotiations. And so that's why normally, at least my experience, we gave wide berth to specific negotiated contractual issues. If they came up, we basically took it down, and our human resources labor relations person took that and said, okay, we're going to have to research that if that's a topic we can really deal with here, because we're not a negotiating committee, and we're not supposed to be, and that's why our minutes could be distributed amongst all of the union and all of the management, and got their engagement, because they would read the minutes and then come back to us and say, hey, I saw you guys were talking about this. I've got something I want to share. And it gave you a more engagement across the organization. Whereas if you're doing it in a form that even really kind of appears to be a continuation of negotiations, my concern is that it's going to possibly put us in a space from a legal perspective where that would be questioned or challenged. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, and I think some of that might be a little beyond me. In my experience, it's certainly beyond my experience. But one of the things that surprised me, and I think it surprised Commissioner Storley as well, was that we could have negotiations in an open meeting. And I was always under the impression, and we learned this in mediation, I was always under the impression that negotiations are confidential. And right, and I thought it was, and if not legally confidential, I thought just out of respect. And that's not the case. However, the mediator did say, or it could be the case with respect, of course. The mediator did say that we'd have a very difficult time if we did have open negotiations or open meeting negotiations, and it's almost a guarantee to go into mediation immediately, which is closed and confidential. So, yeah, it was confusing. I guess mediation was probably the most confusing to me. Ms. Dixon.
The difference, Commissioner Svalson, thank you, Mr. Chair. The difference, Commissioner Svalson, maybe private sector versus public service, that it is an open meeting. To Chairman Mills' point, I think the reason that we should continue keeping it private is just what he said. I fully support that, is out of respect. And to have those sometimes painful conversations together and sharing the results, it works to everybody's best interest.
Yeah, and that's what I thank you so much, because that's what I anticipated. I was going to go do a little more research. I suspected it was private sector issues, that were driving mine, because I've done a lot of different negotiations, but there were very strict rules on that, and so I'd have to come up to speed a little more on the public side of it here to be sure. I don't know, to your point, I don't know that I'd feel completely comfortable having some of those conversations that we had behind closed doors, in full view of everything. But I thought they were actually necessary and, to get to where we needed to be.
Commissioner Hawkins.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we have an idea of how many other counties have this kind of committee and who they might be. Have we talked to other counties and other administrators who have used this form before and have recommendations for us?
Mr. Yorkie.
I have not checked with other counties because, like Pamela, I was kind of waiting for the outcome of this conversation to figure out if this was going to move forward. But that's something we could easily work through AMC and the Minnesota Association of County Administrators to get more information about.
And I don't remember. I think that question was brought up maybe in mediation. I don't remember a number. I'm sorry, Commissioner Hawkins, for me to have any beneficial perspective. Well, so far what I've taken away from our conversation is general support, but concerns about specifics, concerns about costs and time burden, and potentially concerns about, as Commissioner Hawkins stated, another layer, which there can be a risk for communication if there's too many layers. So that's something that we need to keep in mind, is making sure that these conversations are as transparent. I mean, I think the posting of the minutes was mentioned, but also being able to have frank, open conversations is also mentioned within the meeting. So there's going to be a balance there. Mr. Yorkie.
And I just wanted to mention, I mean, we talked about the possible timing of this with BMS being at least 2 months out on being able to provide any kind of training on this. We would be looking at late summer or fall to even convene this kind of committee. And I would have some real concerns given the very time-intensive nature of contract negotiations, which presumably would have started by then. I would have some concerns about trying to do both at the same time. I can see that being all-consuming if we're trying to negotiate the committee and we're trying to negotiate contracts at the same time. It feels like it would leave little time for other kind of ongoing operational activities. So I want to express that.
Commissioner Svalson.
Yeah, last thing, it came back. This is just a recollection, Dave, that I wanted to make sure, pardon me, Mr. Chair, that we had, in fact, if we go forward with this, the one thing you want to be cautious of is that you do not erode the ability of the supervisory and management people in your organization, because for a while we became maybe a little too effective in dealing with the, some of the day-to-day process things. And so people stopped taking, or in some cases they stopped taking things to their leadership, to their supervisor or to their manager, and everything was coming to this committee to resolve, period, right? And so it's just one of these that as you go, if you go forward with this and you're doing it, you want to be cautious of that and really continue to stress that we want the process to function normally and efficiently by bringing the issue forward. So anything that can be resolved at that level gets resolved at that level. That was just the one other thing that from my experience that came forward, and I wanted to just make comment.
That's a very valuable point. I can see where that, there's going to be a learning curve, right, for how everyone interacts with this committee and the committee's role. I'm really hopeful that the training clears up a lot of our questions and concerns, hopefully. To Mr. Yorkey's point about the timing of it, I can see where that would be pretty all-consuming between both negotiations and this committee. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Mr. Yorkey. And I don't know how that'll all pan out there, but Commissioner Sullivan.
I would just like to stress that I think it's important we begin looking at this right now in a really timely fashion, and that the Labor Management Committee can develop and really improve our labor relations, improve the climate in our organization here in Cook County prior to getting really deep into negotiations. So I would like to see us move forward with this training.
Thank you, Commissioner Sullivan. Yeah, I think the training, is a very important first step that might just help clear a lot up, and just got to take that first step and see where we go. I'm really hopeful, so again, maybe this is obvious, but just for a little background, we went into negotiations with having an interim administrator and in a global pandemic. And that made, it was just throw your hands in the air and say, I don't know what's going on. But we as time went on, the pandemic, I guess the economics of the pandemic stabilized, at least for the county's perspective, and that really helped. But within that, we're just trying to get a handle on what things we should be looking at exactly, because there is disagreements with that. So if any development, any progress in that direction, I think could be really beneficial for everyone involved. And we may not even come to an agreement on that, but just having more conversation around that, I think, because we did have some in negotiations, but it didn't get real far, and we couldn't get into reasons as much, and there just wasn't the space or the time to have those deeper conversations. There's a certain level of education that needs to happen on both sides to really understand the other side and why they're looking at things the way they're looking at, and whether it's the county's overall economic standing or larger economic indicators or labor's concerns that they hear about from other counties, and to Ms. Dixon's point about what are the other peer counties that we're looking at, and all those things. If we all can get on if we can just talk more about that and get closer together, I think it'll really improve the negotiations when they do come to a head.
Chairman Mills.
Commissioner Storley.
Thank you. So in our conversation about having the Labor Management Committee and then having a negotiation committee, I think we're looking at two different committees with different people on each of them. And the fact that labor negotiations might be asked to have that start and have the Labor Management Committee start and then have training. So what I'm asking is, what I'm hearing is, we have two different groups of people on these committees, labor management and then negotiations. Is that correct?
I don't know. I think that was a question and concern that Commissioner Swalson had, and I'm hoping that the state training is going to help us look at that a little bit more, especially considering the size of our organization, the size of the collective bargaining units, and it was my understanding, well, from the state's information, it sounded like the whole committee would be on a rotating basis, and there would be almost an alternating switch off, switch on situation. So there's one member from each group hanging on for 2 years, but then after 1 year, the other person would switch off. Versus the federal information had one permanent member and then some rotational members, and so. I think we can probably, since we're going through the state's process, I think we could probably lean on that information a little bit more, but it just wasn't as thorough, I felt, as the federal. So that training, I think, is really what I'm needing, at least, to get these questions answered. But I'm sensing concern on your end about having the two separate committees, or you're just asking for clarity?
Well, I'm asking, so if we decide to go with this, which we're going to have to decide pretty soon, that means all the commissioners will be involved with the training. And then when we get to labor negotiations, all of us are not going to be part of that.
Correct. Yeah. I'm hoping we can all be a part of this training, so that we all know what's involved and we can all agree on the structure, hopefully, and then whether or not it's separate from negotiations and the committee, I don't know. I can see concerns about that. I can also see the value because of the perspectives gained in the committee. Bringing those into negotiations, I'm hoping, is helpful, but maybe that would cause more problems. I don't know.
Well, I think Commissioner Mills, both you and I have talked to other counties, and it seems like the labor negotiation team is made up, and it's mostly administrator, HR, one commissioner, and in some instances, they bring in a negotiator to help them. But I would highly recommend that as 5 commissioners not be involved in labor negotiations. It's not advisable from other counties, and I do attend the Arrowhead County Association meeting once a month, and I did ask those folks, which were 8 representatives there at that time, and none of them have more than one commissioner on their labor negotiations. So. And they're not part of the discussion. They're there only as an observer. So that's just my observation and asking what's going on in other counties.
That's a really good point. And yeah, I learned. Yeah, we talked about this a little bit in our negotiating team, and I did learn a very similar stuff, that it's advised that you keep the commissioners out of negotiating. I feel an obligation at this point, because of the situation of our past negotiations, to be involved, but I think it's a good idea for us to move in that direction, to keep commissioners out of the actual negotiating. But maybe that's a conversation we need to have. We need to have a little bit more conversation about that, and I guess I would recommend having that after our training for the I mean, these are separate committees, or separate groups, but after our labor management committee training, if we so choose to do that. Unless someone has, I mean, do commissioners want to talk about that before that, or Commissioner Salsa?
I think the only reason that we would need to have a conversation before on that particular topic, Chairman, is if you're put into position where the collective bargaining units are ready to begin their negotiation. And so that timeline, I think, is going to drive that conversation.
Yes, yeah, good point. Commissioner Hawkins.
Can you tell me how many hours of training you expect this to be? And are we opening it up to all interested county employees, or are we going to have an application process? How many people will be eligible for this training?
To your first question about timing, I believe it's an all-day training, and to the numbers, I don't know. That's another really good question. I'm not sure if it's just representatives from each bargaining unit or what. But that's a great question that we should bring to the Bureau of Mediation Services. Yeah, because where do you draw the line there, right? I mean, I see the value for everybody, but I don't know how practical it is to have everyone in the county attend a one-day training at once. Well, I know that's not practical, actually. So how do we navigate that is a good question. Ms. Dixon, do you know, is it just a one single day, full day training? Is that, do you recollect that?
I don't remember. Sorry.
Yep. I'm sorry, I'm flipping to the Bureau's screen. So if somebody wants to add a comment while I do that, I won't see you, but please speak up. It says 6.5 hours. And additional meetings are scheduled as required, and got to be careful here. I think I'm referencing the federal information now, but I believe the mediators will be through that training and then potentially getting the meetings started as well, facilitating them in the beginning and then having to pass it off. And the structure, again, isn't very clear about minute taking or chairing the meetings, but again, I think that's a rotating thing. If we do decide to go down this road, and it's sounding like it, there is an application to fill out, and then we would pass that on to the bargaining units as well, for them to sign on to, and then I believe we just submit that to the Bureau and go from there. Before we do that, are there questions that we want answered, or are we feeling like the training might be the best place to get those answers? Does anyone have strong enough hesitancy to wait on applying?
Mr. Chair, I would recommend that we move forward with the training, and I think a lot of our questions will be addressed during that training.
Yes, Commissioner Sullivan, I think I agree. The biggest question for me before the training is Commissioner Hawkins, like, who all will be there? Is it just some reps from the units, or how vast does that go? And my assumption is it's just some representatives from the units that they'll need to decide on. But there is a lot of value in going through that training just so everyone could be on the same page. But clearly there's limitations on what can happen. Okay, well, it seems like our conversation is slowing down a little bit. I would entertain a motion to apply for this training at this point. Commissioner Sullivan.
I move to move forward with the Labor Management Committee training through the Bureau of Mediation Services.
Thank you, Commissioner Sullivan. Commissioner Swalson.
Swalson seconds.
Thank you, Commissioner Swalson. We have a motion and a second. Is there some further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, I'll do a roll call vote. Commissioner Sullivan.
Aye.
Commissioner Swalson.
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins.
Aye.
Commissioner Storley.
Aye.
Commissioner Mills is aye as well. We have unanimous approval of the motion. Very good, thank you. I'm excited and hopeful. Hoping this can help the organization and help the process. That moves us on to our second item in the agenda, which is adjournment. Looking for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Commissioner Hawkins. We have a motion. Is there support?
Swalson seconds.
Thank you, Commissioner Salsa. Motion and support. Looking for discussion. Hearing and seeing none. Roll call vote. Commissioner Hawkins.
Aye.
Commissioner Swalson.
Aye.
Commissioner Sullivan.
Aye.
Commissioner Storley.
Aye.
Commissioner Mills is aye as well. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day, and thank you for attending the special meeting.